Hello, this online lecture will focus on the rise of breastfeeding and the emergence and growth of lactation as a specialty. By the end of the session, you should be able to describe at least one factor that contributed to the rise in breastfeeding and discuss the evolution of lactation as a specialty. In our prior online lecture, we spent some time discussing some factors that led to declines in breastfeeding. In fact, evidence indicates that by the end of World War II, breastfeeding rates were as low as 20%. But by the mid-50s, a small group of women became interested in promoting breastfeeding. What do you think prompted these women's renewed interest in breastfeeding? If you said the natural childbirth movement, you are correct. In fact, in the article you read called The Resurgence of Breastfeeding at the End of the Second Millennium, Wright and Chandler reviewed various social practices and breastfeeding data and found evidence to suggest that the practice that most likely contributed to the rise in breastfeeding was the natural childbirth movement. Do you know what the natural childbirth movement is? I'd like you to stop the video for a moment and on a piece of paper, jot down what you know or think the natural childbirth movement was. Ideally, on your piece of paper, you wrote something along the lines that it was a movement that advocated that women can give birth naturally without medication, with as little intervention as possible through using a variety of comfort measures, including things like deep breathing. Also on the same lines, the natural childbirth movement advocated breastfeeding as a natural way to feed a baby. And the natural childbirth movement spread throughout the United States in the late 40s and 50s. And at this time, this was a radically different than the American process of childbirth at the time. Again, I'd like you to pause the online video and on a piece of paper, write down how the natural childbirth movement differed from routine childbirth practices in the 1950s. Once you've completed writing down how those two differ, please turn the video back on. So I want to emphasize that the natural childbirth movement was a radical shift from birthing practices in the 1950s. So what did you say when you wrote down factors relating to routine birth practices in the 1950s? Hopefully you said some of the factors listed on this PowerPoint slide. So moms and their family members were not educated at the time about the childbirth process. Mothers were also medicated during birth, resulting in an unconscious mother. Also during birth, mother was surrounded by healthcare providers, but no family members, not her mom, not her husband, or any other family members. Also after birth, the baby was separated from the mother, stayed in the nursery, and was taken care of by the nurse, who most likely was formula feeding her baby. Now, what did you write down for birth practices encouraged by the natural childbirth movement? Hopefully you wrote down some of the factors on this PowerPoint slide. So proponents of the natural childbirth movement advocated that mothers and their family members should take childbirth preparation classes to learn about childbirth process and a variety of comfort measures, including deep breathing to help reduce pain during labor. They also advocated that mother could give birth unmedicated and be fully conscious during her childbirth. Also, proponents of the natural childbirth movement advocated that during childbirth, the mother would be surrounded both by the healthcare providers taking care of her during the birthing process, but also her family members, including the father of the baby. And then after birth, the mother and baby would stay together and breastfeed. So again, we talked about how there was a renewed interest in breastfeeding. Several women who were inspired by the natural childbirth movement began breastfeeding. And what these women found was that it was very challenging to breastfeed because there was nowhere to access accurate breastfeeding knowledge or support about breastfeeding. Since most women at the time weren't breastfeeding or hadn't breastfed their own children, most new mothers, own mothers, aunts, sisters, friends, were not able to answer any of their questions or concerns about breastfeeding. There was no place for a new breastfeeding mother to obtain accurate knowledge about breastfeeding or support to breastfeed. Recognizing that there was a great need for women in the community who were interested in breastfeeding to obtain accurate knowledge and support to enable them to successfully breastfeed, several women who were breastfeeding decided to start a voluntary breastfeeding support group to help mothers obtain knowledge and support for breastfeeding. That voluntary breastfeeding support group was called and is called the Leche League International. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the Leche League International. A few highlights about the inception of the group and leading to where we are today. So in 1956, the founders of the Leche League International held their first meeting in a private home. Meetings expanded to churches, parenting centers, and various other public venues that provided meeting spaces. Today, the Leche League International has branches all over the world. It is an international organization, and as initially their mission still remains the same, they hope to help mothers breastfeed by providing mother-to-mother support and education. So to summarize, with a renewed interest in breastfeeding, there was a need for more breastfeeding support, and thus emerged voluntary breastfeeding support group of La Leche League. Initially, assistance to breastfeeding mothers was unpaid. However, in the 80s, some experienced breastfeeding volunteer leaders began to explore the possibility of obtaining paid work assisting mothers to breastfeed. What do you think these women did? Well, basically what they did was they began work to create a certification program for a new healthcare profession with expertise in lactation. The first step that they took was they established within the La Leche League a lactation consultant department. Next, through a loan from the Leche League, they established the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners, and they worked to develop an exam that would enable individuals to demonstrate their clinical competencies in the field of lactation. I would now like to share a few key initiatives implemented to help establish the profession. In 1985, IBLC, or the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners, administered their first exam, and individuals who passed that exam earned the designation of the International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. On that same year, the first year that the IBLC exam was administered, the group of leaders implemented two other initiatives to help establish a credible profession. First, they established a national association, the International Lactation Consultant Association, and they also began a peer-reviewed journal that publishes research in the field of lactation, the Journal of Human Lactation. Today, there are actually 3 journals that focus exclusively on lactation-related research: the Journal of Human Lactation, Breastfeeding Medicine, and the International Breastfeeding Journal. Currently, there are approximately 30,000 professionals in 108 countries who hold the International Board Certified Lactation Consultant certification. So as you can see, since 1985, when the IBLC exam was first administered, the field has grown quite substantially, and we now have a new healthcare professional called the lactation consultant. I would like to end this online session by reminding you that if you have not watched the short video about the IBCLC that was posted on campus, please do so now.